stills of position 3?
Can you have it here? I'm not sure. You can stop it, right? Yeah, I can stop it. I don't have, I don't believe I have position 3.
Is there a position 3 still?
No.
Let's go ahead and step forward now to position 3. Okay, right there's the
Okay.
Okay, so.
You want to run it?
start right there. Use-
Okay.
So now we have an illustration, sir, of third position, right?
Yes.
Okay. And I know the things in the yellow circles are items of evidence, physical things. One of them is the final resting place of Trayvon Martin's body, one is the shell casing, right?
Correct.
Okay. And the place that you have these vis-a-vis those items in the yellow circles is an estimation.
The
Right.
placement of the yellow circles?
No,
Is
sir.
an
The
estimate?
placement of the figures with respect to the yellow circles.
Correct. They're positioned in between the items of
They're
evidence.
just generally speaking in between them, but as far as telling me that they should be in exactly that location as opposed to a few degrees to the left, a few inches or a few feet to one direction or the other, you couldn't really tell me, because that's, of course, not what you're trying to do with the video, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Their positioning relative to each other is the purpose of the video.
Well, and you also, speaking of that, even their position relative to each other, you couldn't tell me exactly what angle the person's head who's on top there should be, right?
Correct, because it wasn't still, so
Right. The whole thing is actually moving, so again, this is in sort of an estimation.
what part of it are you talking about as an estimation?
The actual positions of the figures. And I'm talking not,
It's not an estimation, it's a placement according to Dr. DeMaio.
Dr. DeMaio told you they looked exactly like that?
Their positioning, yes.
I'm sorry, he described that exact degree of tilt and everything to you?
Within 2 inches.
How many inches did he say Trayvon Martin's head was off the ground?
That wasn't relevant.
Okay, so the answer is, you, again, this would be an approximation, because you don't know the exact answer to that question.
Approximation of his head?
Yeah,
Yes.
okay. As far as these white things that are depicted here, these are the sort of the sprinkler boxes, the hard plastic boxes that are out there?
Sprinkler boxes and drain boxes.
Okay, those hard metal or plastic covers, whatever they're made of?
Correct.
Okay. Now, you also do I understand it, reviewed at least one of the statements of the defendant, in this case, George Zimmerman?
That was supplied to me. I'm not sure which one you're talking about.
Did you use any of those to create this animation?
Any of the animation, or what part of the animation you're talking about?
Any part of it?
The initial, some of the initial portion at the T intersection.
Okay. And that is it?
Yes, all the rest are based on the other witnesses.
Okay. So all the rest of it is based on something other than what the defendant's statement was. And which statement of the defendant are you talking about?
The video walkthrough.
Okay. That is the only one you used?
Yes.
Is there some reason you didn't use any of the others?
Because I had other witnesses that placed that in the police reports positioned them throughout the animation.
Let me be more clear. You only used it as it relates to the beginning of this video where you see the two figures walk up to each other and then one of them punches the other, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And I used it in conjunction with Jenna Lauer's testimony about that is where the initial conflict took place.
Is there a reason that you only used the video walkthrough statement as opposed to any of the other several statements? Or did you just pick that one because it was the longest or whatever? I mean, I'm just asking.
I had other witnesses that laid out the scene from then on.
Okay. Talk to me about, and if we can, I'm done asking questions about this, Your Honor, so thank you. I'm not even going to start with that.
You can just close it.
Okay. Talk to me about any types of validation that have been done with this particular method that you used to create animation.
Any other validations on?
Right, on either the several types of software or programs that you have used, have those, other than just buying them and assuming they're working right, and that they're not at least failing to work for you, are you aware of any sort of validation studies that have been done on any of them?
Validation studies on the motion capture suit.
Only on the suit?
Motion capture suit, and also the 3D software that I use. It's used by engineers, and with all the time that I've spent using it, if there was some inaccuracy in any of the measurements or in using the software, I haven't found any.
Let's talk about how accurate it is. Are these things accurate to what measurement? In other words, are we talking hundredths of an inch, thousandths of an inch? What are these measurements designed to be specifically accurate to?
It is accurate as you want, thousandths of an inch.
What did you set them to here?
Just what was relevant to what I needed in terms of positioning of the items, measuring, for example, from the porch to the shell casing, and
Okay.
there wasn't anything in this that required thousandths of an inch of accuracy.
And I think I perhaps asked it and didn't follow up earlier when I asked about when you're directing the people who are wearing these suits and they're engaging in whatever behavior that you're having them engage in. Are you telling them to sort of go at it with a simulated fight, or are you telling them to simply, pose this way, stop, move, go this way, that sort of thing?
Just move according to what the witnesses wrote in their police reports,
So
in
it's
terms
also-
of what position they were in, what they were doing, for example, ground pounding or that type of movement, and just to how they would naturally interact with the ground and the slope and the sidewalk.
So you were sort of almost like directing a movie, saying to an actor or an actress, go here and do this. They weren't just doing it on their own?
Correct. It was based on the location of evidence on the scene, the type of surface they were on, what was written in the police report in terms of what they were doing at that location.
When we're talking, for example, about the actual motion, for example, at the first part of that tape, where there are figures in motion, did you have them attempt to simulate the actual speed of that? Or did you just simply have a person in a capture seat make that motion and then you adjusted the speed using the software?
The swing and the reaction to the swing is, it wasn't sped up. That's the natural movement.
So that's as fast as the actual actors happen to do it.
Correct.
Any idea whether that's accurate as opposed to simply another estimation?
It was just a movement portraying that occurrence.
So as to whether it's
And how somebody doing that motion, recording somebody doing that motion.
if I were to ask you, can you tell this court for certain that it is an accurate depiction of the motion and the blow that it's supposed to depict, you'd have to tell me no, right?
As an accurate movement of somebody swinging and striking another person in the face.
Just as the actor decided to do it.
As a human would move. There's other ways of doing that reconstructionists do animation, which is hand animating on the computer, where you take a 3D figure, move an arm, advance it some frames, move the arm again, and so they're just estimating about the way something really moves. With the advantage with the motion capture suit is you put the suit on, and that's the way a person will move.
But that's the way that person on that day, while you had the suit on them, moved.
Correct.
Okay. You can't tell me that's the way that if we assume it's one figure is Trayvon Martin, one is George Zimmerman, you can't tell me that that's actually how they did it that night.
This is just portraying one person coming up and striking another person in that manner. With respect to their heights.
Do I understand that the conclusions, if we call the animation a conclusion or a depiction, that this is not necessarily your opinion, but it is what you have attempted to create based upon essentially what you've been told by lawyers mostly?
No.
No?
It's my reconstruction based on what I was given in discovery, all the different things in discovery that was mentioned, putting the scene together with my actually being out there with the motion capture suit's data and fine-tuning it with consultation with the attorneys. So it wasn't, it was something that was created based on evidence and testimony and written reports, not solely based on what an attorney told me to do.
Correct me if I'm wrong. All the actual in-court testimony would have been funneled through the lawyers.
Correct.
Okay.
Since I wasn't able to view in court.
All the actual action out there is estimated based upon your interpretation of what you were given in discovery.
A reconstruction, yes, based on evidence that I was given in discovery.
Okay, and an example of that, again, just to use the example again, is the shell casing. As to, you know where it landed, but you don't know exactly how it got there. So your depiction of the figures in location to it is simply based upon your estimation of where it would have been and where they would have had to have been in some proximity.
And also their previous positioning prior to that, seconds before, and the position, again, of the shell casing.
Okay. And as far as you know, you're the only one who has done this sort of thing with these motion capture suits.
Correct.
Okay. Anything else you want to get into? Thank you. No other questions?
Thank you, redirect.
Yes, just to start with the last question first.
Correct.
And
There's
it's
a
just,
lot
you know, more accurate, would that be correct?
more accurate, there's less cleanup time, and the data is a lot cleaner than other motion capture or motion suits like this.
Because these.
And you can also,
Do you have to be in direct line of sight with your computer antenna?
I could record somebody that goes through the door and on the other side.
To capture suits generally accepted in your industry as a way of capturing motion.
Yes, it's the most accurate way of capturing a person's movements.
The newest and better, but not much different than in concept than what the older motion caption suits capture.
Yes, they're restricted by the fact that they have to be recorded with a camera.
Okay.
And the disadvantage of that also is you don't have data, you can't see the data on the movement of an arm, for example. On this motion capture suit, you can see data of all the accelerometers.
And those accelerometers then are hooked in together to software that then recreates the movement of those various accelerometers in the context of a body.
Yes, it captures it all, yes.
Okay. You could put 4 of them on a Frisbee and fly a Frisbee. Could you put them on a Frisbee and fly a Frisbee, and those accelerometers would kick back information to your computer, and then you could recreate the Frisbee spinning as it flies?
Yes, it's also been used, they've also done recordings of jumping out of a plane and recording somebody skydiving with it.
Okay. And then being able to recreate that.
Yes.
Just going back to the beginning, in the concept of the beginning parts of the animation and the modifications of it, have you ever waited until after a trial is over to create your animation? It sounds senseless in the question, but I want you to answer it. Are your animations normally done in anticipation of and in presentation to trial?
Yes.
Okay. And are they normally done with the available information like discovery that's available to you?
Yes, they are.
Okay. And then is that, when you have that information available to you, will you go back and modify your animation, your presentation, based upon new information if it's given to you?
During trial or before trial?
Whenever.
Or?
Even if before trial. If I were to come to you and say, here's, in this particular case, here's a new piece of evidence, here's a new witness statement we were unaware of, and it may impact on your animation, would you then go back and fit that into the facts that you utilized as the foundation for your animation?
Yes.
And have you done that in the generation 3, or the most recent generation of video that you created, or animation, based upon consultation with me and saying such things as, did you in fact modify the animation as we discussed matters?
Yes, the whole purpose of it is to get it as accurate as possible.
And did I then discuss with you certain testimonies in trial that led to modifications?
Yes.
For example, on some of the stills that you had gone through with the judge, was there changes in those stills based upon actual trial testimony as opposed to deposition or statement testimony?
Yes.
And did you simply take out one text and put in another?
Correct.
And object to continue leading.
To say.
Trying to move it along, Your Honor, to make it
lead.
I understand. Were there changes that you made to the stills based upon testimony?
Yes, it's not a change in, it's more of a defining it better.
Where did you get that information from?
Consultation with you and Mr. West.
And what was discussed with you during that consultation?
What came out in court and testimony.
And based upon that consultation with either Mr. West or myself, did you make those modifications to the stills?
Yes.
As to the, we were talking about the point of, have you ever waited until the middle of trial to begin the creation process of an animation?
No, I like to begin it as soon as I can, as far ahead of trial as I can.
And in the information that you were forwarded in this case, was information from Mr. Zimmerman's various statements given to the police forwarded to you as well for your consideration?
Yes.
And did you incorporate any of that information into your animation?
Yes.
One part, go ahead.
If I look at what his video testimony was and just verify that there's no conflicting or nothing that conflicts with what I used in creating the scene.
Okay. And you had all of his other statements available, the interview statements of the various law enforcement with you, available to you as well, did you not?
Correct.
And the significance, what significance did you attend to Mr. Zimmerman's statements, all of those that are now in evidence presented by the state, in assisting you in creating any portion of your animation?
The initial conflict, or the point where the conflict.
And was that specific to Mr. Zimmerman stating that he was struck?
Yes.
And in a location approximate to the location where he said he was struck?
Yes, where he said he was struck, backed up by Jenna Lauer's positioning of the sound where the conflict started.
And back then, of course, you had, what did you have in addition to Jenna Lauer's statement that you utilized to place the initial location of the altercation?
What did I have?
Who else did you have?
Jeremy Weinberg's police report.
Did you even have other witnesses who said the location was there, such as Jane Sudiker, who was in the apartment back behind the T? Did you have that information available to you?
Yes.
Okay. And was all of that then part of what you utilized?
Yes.
Was there any specific evidence that was found at the scene to assist you in determining that that was the estimate or probable location of the initial part of the altercation?
Yes. The first piece of evidence was the Mr. Zimmerman's flashlight keychain.
How did that location?
Conflict that took place at the T intersection. Then you've got the flashlight, which goes down to the direction where the next witness testified that they were located.
Okay. Mr. Manti many times suggested that this is just an estimation. Will you acknowledge that if we look at that animation, it is somewhat of an estimation as to their initial location?
Correct.
But is that estimation in conflict with any of the evidence that you are aware of in the discovery that you reviewed?
Are you talking about their initial
Yes.
location? No, it's not.
If, for example, I was to have you recreate the animation of a shell casing discharge and the way it spins from out of it spinning to the ground, would you be able to create an animation that accomplished that?
Yes.
Would it, however, be an estimation to a certain extent of how many actual spins the shell casing may have made in its trajectory to the ground.
Yes, because that would be in the computer where you would rely on the physics in the computer to do the reconstruction of it. But even in the real world, when you do that with any gun, it's going to, each of the ejections are going to vary.
Is there an inherent estimation that exists in the entirety of your industry of, be it accident reconstruction or event reconstruction?
Is there
an estimation variable that exists in every animation that you make?
correct? There's certain scenarios that you can create, but there's not an infinite number of scenarios. Those that are in conflict with the evidence, with witness testimony, those obviously can't be done that way. So the scenarios that can be created are consistent with testimony, witnesses, and evidence and the scene.
As an example, in your modifications of the animations, did you change, was a decision made in consult with me and others not to show movement of the bodies from the initial location until the location at rest? Was that a decision made?
Yes.
And why was that decision made?
Basically because from witness testimony, we know which direction they moved in, but it's not defined anywhere exactly how they got from that one position to the second, to the position by Mr. Good's condominium. So rather than try to create something, that's why I used the arrow to just show the direction that they had moved into the next position.
Was that then a decision by you as the creator of the animation?
Yes.
To avoid creating animation that wasn't documented by witnesses?
Yes.
And then why did you then pick up again, and we're going to go to the last video and just use the stills, where did the information come then to place those people where they were?
The initial position, where it's labeled initial position, that came from John Good. The second position, that also came from John Good.
The initial position.
I'm going to back it up and ask him to, well, it was working. As soon as the projector warms back up, I'll do it, but I'll have him testify to that. Let's be careful that we all talk about the same positions. I'm going to make some definitions and tell me if we can live with those. Initial position was the event that started at the T intersection. Is that, can we use that? Or is that, or do we want to define that as something else?
If we could define it as something else.
Okay, we'll define that as the T intersection event.
Okay.
Then tell us what you mean by the first event.
The first event is the first visual that John Good had on their position. It's
Okay.
labeled initial position.
Okay. Give me 1 second to convince your computer to work. Okay, that was the one where you had the testimony. This guy is about to come up here. The first position that you're speaking of.
It's going backwards.
Sorry, give me 1 second. I'll try and get it back to where it needs to be without sounding like the White Album from the Beatles backwards.
You can just grab the little white ball and slide it around.
Just don't use Max. Sorry. Okay. I'm just going to run it through to try and get us all caught up. This is the T intersection event we're talking about.
Yes.
And while we're talking about this, let's talk about some of the frailties inherent in the animation. You do not suggest that there is any witness that specifically identifies, for example, in this case, Trayvon Martin walking just along one side of the sidewalk. Is that correct?
Correct.
That is an estimation based upon George Zimmerman's testimony that he was approached from the left and the back?
Correct. And there was no, I didn't find any evidence or witnesses to dispute.
Okay. So then we have this. That information right there, where does that come from that gave you the foundation to create that portion of the animation?
From Mr. Zimmerman's video walkthrough and also from Jenna Lauer's and Jeremy Weinberg's police report.
And to a certain extent from Mr. Diker's also location of the general event?
Yes.
Okay. Now we see the arrow, which we talked about a moment ago. And is that what you had talked about being the arrow instead of having the actual figures move without any witnesses to identify them?
Yes.
Okay. Let's stop here for 1 second. This is what we now know to be John Good's sliding glass door.
Yes.
Based upon additional communication either with me or with him, was his position in the area of the sliding glass door modified?
Correct, it was.
And if you would advise to the court how it was and why it was how it was modified and why?
Initially, I had him just coming straight out from the middle of the sliding glass door. But after his refinement of his position, I placed him on the left side, the left sliding glass door, 1 foot out from the middle of the door.
And was that based upon the consultation regarding his specific testimony or his specific recall?
Did gentleman object to leading?
I'm just trying to move it along, but I'll change it.
Sustained.
What was it based upon, and what information was given to you and from whom that helped you modify it?
It was based on consultation with you and Mr. West on the feedback of Mr. Good in the placement of him in the scene.
Did Mr. Good, from our conversation, look at a animation and then ask for modifications?
Correct.
And is that the modifications that were changed on here?
Yes.
Now, this is where the 911 tape comes in, right?
Correct.
And there was questions concerning why the timing of the 911 call began. So, tell me, was there a point that existed in both Ms. Lauer's 911 call and Mr. Good's testimony as presented to you that was an intersection that allowed you to relate the two together?
Yes, it was the gunshot.
If I might approach the witness for a second, Your Honor, if you're going to see it as well. In effect, do we have a timeline of Jenna Lauer's 911 call with a gunshot at what you know to be about 45 seconds?
Correct.
Whatever it might be.
45 seconds.
And then do we also have a timeline of John Good's testimony and lining up the gunshot on his testimony?
Yes.
And if you line these two up, does that then give you a timeline from which you can estimate John Good's actions on the animation?
It's pretty much just taking the 911 timeline, taking the timeline which Mr. Good had with respect to the gunshot and just matching up that one event.
Let's do that for a moment from your testimony and trying to relate these two. What information did you have from John Good as to where he was when he heard the gunshot and what he had done how many seconds before that?
He was on his way up to make a 911 call, and the time that we had, if you go to the gunshot, you can, if you back up on Mr. Good's timeline, he gave an estimate on from when he went into the condominium till the time that the gunshot went off.
Okay. And did you then simply, if you will, calibrate your animation to General Lauer's phone call, did you then use Mr. Good's estimation of how long it took him to leave the area he viewed until he heard the gunshot before?
It's actually deleting.
Stan.
You are,
Well, I have a question, and let me interject, because in reviewing my notes, Mr. Good testifies that he also called 911, and he was on the phone with them and connected at or about the time of the gunshot. Was that used? Was that 911 call by John Good used in your comparison with the 911 call of Ms. Lauer?
There was no gunshot on his 911 call.
No, but his testimony was, he heard the gunshot while he was dialing 911, and in fact, I thought he said he was waiting for that call to connect. So we would know when that call connected in relation to the Lauer 911 call. So did you use that as your basis for the timeline of this 911 call and the testimony of Mr. Good?
He was still waiting for it to connect. So.
My question is, did you use that? Did you consider at all in making this timeline in connection with the animation? That's a known time when he was calling. His testimony was he heard the gunshot while he was dialing 911. In fact, he was waiting for the call to connect when he heard the gunshot. Did you use his 911 connection in doing the comparison?
I used his estimation from how long it took him to get up to make his call.
Okay.
to further the court's inquiry, if you were to have the time of the phone call and estimate from there the time it might take to connect, would that help calibrate the animation even more refined?
Yes.
Okay. And would that be able to be accomplished tonight, for example, if I gave you the timing of the call?
I wouldn't be able to re-render and redo the animation, but I can do some marking when he came in.
Not to just discourse with you as you're on the stand, but if there was a few second difference, it would require simply moving the audio track of the Lauer call, would it not? And the animation would stay the same?
Yes.
Okay. Because that's the only relation, would it not be? As if the gunshot is relating the timing of Lauer's call, that would only change the audio track a few seconds one way or the other, would it not?
I believe it would affect Mr. Good's time that he went into the apartment or into the condo.
Okay. Well, let's go forward on that, presuming that your estimation of your use of his estimation as to how many seconds from leaving the view of the scene to hearing the gunshot is close to accurate. And we'll.
Well, go ahead, because I don't want to interject what my notes say, but I'll do that in argument when you're doing your argument.
Well, I don't want to miss an opportunity to clear up an inquiry if we can. It's the three of us right now.
Is there any objection from the state?
Objection as to the court asking questions?
Yes.
None whatsoever.
Okay. My notes, and of course the record will correct me if I'm wrong, the only times that Mr. Good gave was that he was at home. It was between 7:05 and 7:15 p.m. when he was watching TV in his living room with his wife, and he heard the noise outside. The other times that he gives on cross was the entire time he was watching was 8 to 10 seconds. He doesn't say where within that time frame he saw the 8 to 10 seconds, but we do know from his testimony that he was dialing 911 and waiting for it to connect when he heard the gunshot. So I don't know how long he was in the house before that gunshot and he's dialing 911, and I don't know what the 8 to 10 seconds were if he says it was either 7:05 or 7:15. So the problem that I'm having to relate to that right now is the use of the Lauer 911 call in conjunction with Mr. Good's testimony. I don't understand where that timeline is coming from based upon John Good's testimony.
My understanding of his testimony, and again, the record, I'll need to review the actual transcript, was that he left the area of the view of the scene, turned around, and immediately grabbed his phone and started dialing.
What time did he go out there? At 7:05 or 7:15
He
or
went out there,
thereafter? Because
I would
I'll read you my notes, and of course the record is what
Yes,
is
Your Honor.
correct. These are just my notes. But he said from 7:05, it was between 7:05 and 7:15. They were watching TV in the living room. He heard a noise outside. First it was a faint noise, and he didn't think anything of it. He couldn't hear words. Then he heard the same noise, just louder, seemed like it was getting closer. He couldn't hear any words, and he didn't know if there was more than one person. He went to look out of his glass sliding door, which had the blinds drawn. He cracked the blinds. There was a light on the porch. He could only see someone or something out there. He opened the blinds and the glass sliding door. He took one step onto the concrete, looked like a tussle, could not see an object, and then he described how they were, the vertical on the ground. He yelled out, "What's going on?" Then my point being is he doesn't give another time other than when he heard the gunshot was while he was trying to connect with 911, so that would give us a time. And he said in cross that the entire time he was watching was 8 to 10 seconds.
Right.
Did that begin when he was looking out the blinds, the crack of the blinds, or did that begin when he took a step out onto the porch and observed that? I don't know. That wasn't testified to, so I'd like to know in this animation where Ms. Lauer's 911 call fits into his testimony.
I can tell you this, that his call connected at 19:17:15, that is in evidence.
So that's 7:17.
7:17 and 15
seconds.
seconds.
Uh-huh.
You know that Ms. Lauer's call started at 19:16:11, and that it is 45 seconds into the call, or at 7:16:56, that the gunshot goes off.
And that's
If you-
different from the timeline that you have up on here in connection with where he was and what he saw.
I disagree, but I understand the court's concern.
Well,
That of course, the way where I believe it lines up is if you use the gunshot as the precise moment of the two calls, not that it was on the call, but if it took Mr. Good somewhere around 15 to 20 seconds to get the call, place it, and wait for it to connect. We don't have that testimony, but we do have Ms. Lauer's testimony, who also testified it took about 20 seconds or so for her to make the phone call and connect. So if you...
Well, he didn't say he said he was waiting for it to connect. And we'll have to look back, I guess, in the record to see if my notes were correct on that or not. And I'm saying these are just my notes.
Sure.
But as I recall him saying he had dialed the 911 and was waiting for it to connect. So that, a few seconds here or there, but then again, where's the 8 to 10 seconds that he viewed this?
And where's
Very-
the 30-second gap between the connection time and the gunshot call and everything else. The court has hit upon the central problem here, and that is there is no hard and fast ability to say that this is an accurate depiction. That's been the state's perspective all along.
Well, and the case law says it doesn't have to be exact.
But it has to be
And,
accurate.
you know, so I don't necessarily have a problem with other parts of it. But when you're trying to overlay a 911 call with the animation, I think it has to be closer to exact than not closer.
I understand, and I might be able to fix that by recalling Mr. Good to get a couple of questions answered by him, so I want to make sure that focus, well, I have the right to, so I...
No, I'm shaking my
Oh.
head because we're having the hearing now.
I understand.
I'm
But-
not going to have this hearing go on for days and days. This
Let me
is the
just-
hearing now, and I
if
guess
I
I
could
should
my-
not have, can I please finish?
I'm sorry.
Okay. I guess I should not have commented because then this wouldn't come up and then I could just rule on it after you're finished. I'm not making these comments to cause you to call Mr. Good into this hearing. We have a transcript of what his testimony is, or we could have a transcript as to it. I'll stop talking, let you finish with your evidence, and then I'll make my comments.
I guess my response was going to be to the court that if it is accurate, and it seems to be undisputed and in evidence that Mr. Good's phone call was connected at 7:17:15, and that if we have evidence from Ms. Lauer that the decision to make a call to 911 and its connection is about 20 to 25 seconds, and that's in, then if you were to back it out of the time, then I think you are within seconds of when the gunshot was heard on Ms. Lauer's call because of this reason. We know that the gunshot was heard per Ms. Lauer's call at 7.
Let me stop you here. I didn't mean to go into an argument. I'd like you to finish
Okay.
with Mr. Schumacher, and we can get into that.
An argument, yes, Your
Yes.
Honor. When, in relation to when he left the view of the scene, when he heard the gunshot.
Yes,
And is that how you then backed out the time, gunshot that Mr. Good heard back in time and sort of went in reverse to when he was viewing the scene?
correct.
And do you recall the time lag that you utilized in order to calibrate that back to the Lauer phone call?
The time lag between,
When he said, going forward in time, when he said he turned away from the scene to when he said he heard the gunshot?
I'm not sure the exact number of seconds.
Can you
That-
let the judge know then what you used in determining when to start the Lauer tape in relation to the video?
Well, in backing it out, his going back inside from the condo is based on consultation with you and from his feedback on the video.
Okay. So, does the necessity of being absolutely accurate, is that,
Whose feedback on the video?
Mr. Goods.
When did that happen?
Oh, consultation, in consultation with Mr. Omar.
Can you tell me what date that was?
No.
I can?
Was it after the trial started?
Yes.
He was under sequestration as a witness and he was subject to being recalled.
And I was going to have him view the video to document it, and he said there were
He
problems
was
with it.
consultation with changing parts of the video.
Absolutely. As an
Okay,
expert,
Go ahead.
as an expert, Your Honor,
Mr. Good's not an expert.
no,
Mr. Good's a witness under witness sequestration.
absolutely. And he was being used to authenticate the animation, since it's his view. He had problems with it, and I attempted to address and fix his problems with it through this expert.
None of which, by the way, has been disclosed to the state until this moment.
Go ahead.
Let's then go forward with the animation.
I'm not sure. There's just someone screaming outside.
Okay, what's the address that they're near?
Eileen? Is this in the Twin Lakes homes in Sanford?
Yes.
We've just talked about how this was calibrated, but let's move forward to the initial position. What information did you use to identify this as the initial position of the two?
His comment about, the initial position of
This
Mr.
position we're
Zimmerman.
looking at now.
That was in consultation with you about some testimony.
Okay. And we also at this point, or did you change this from true animation to still?
Yes, just to eliminate, just to mitigate any random movements, because there was a lot of movements going on. So this was just to show the position, one person's position relative to the other person's position, according to Mr. Good.
And was this then done in order to make it more accurate
Yes,
and to avoid any or other inaccuracies?
yes.
Okay. And is it a male or female?
And then what was this change from the first position to the second position dependent upon?
Also based on consultation with you and from his testimony.
And again, no animation at this point to avoid the concerns you just talked about?
Correct.
It sounds like a male.
And you don't know why?
I don't know why. I think they're yelling help, but I don't know. Just send someone quick. Say stop.
Okay. Does he look?
And advise the court, if you would, how the determination was made to use the third position.
The third position was from consultation with Dr. DeMaio, and also proximity to the prior position, which was just seconds before, and also to the items of evidence around that area.
Did it also include the final resting place of Mr. Martin?
Eventually,
And is the one we're about to see, that last position, then related to this third position?
correct, which is marker number 6, which is one of the things that comes into play on the position is also you have a slope there. So it's interaction with the slope.
Is that a slope that's better identified by one of the posters that were viewed by the court earlier?
Yes.
And as we're talking about that, does your computer program have such physical laws like gravity in it so that things will fall in the way they're supposed to fall based upon gravity?
It does, but in this case, those physical properties were provided by the motion capture suit.
Kurt?
I can't see him. I don't want to go out there. I don't know what's going on. So they're sending him.
Again, was the decision at this point not to have animation a change from a previous generation?
Correct. It's just to show position.
And this is the position, I'll continue it.
So you think he's yelling help?
Yes.
All right. What is your serial number?
Before we move, this is the position that was modified based upon your conversation with Dr. DeMaio?
Yes.
And to what extent, again, was it modified?
Leaning over Mr. Zimmerman, just to verify that position with the
And
doctor.
Was the leaning over something you got from Dr. DeMaio based upon his viewing of the clothing and whatnot?
Yes.
And what he discussed with you was his anticipated testimony
Correct.
regarding the clothing and the positioning of the bodies?
Yes.
Three.
That was 3 on.
Thank you.
And now it's about to go to the 4th.
There's gunshots.
You just
And what you have identified as the after shot position? What information did you utilize to come up with that?
That was their position based on Selma Mora's um, report of what she saw after the shot.
Okay. Any other information, whether it be from Mr. Zimmerman's testimony, other witnesses' testimony, or eventual identification of the body location, was that used as well?
It was also consistent with Mr. Zimmerman's video testimony.
I see that there is a green circle. I've moved away from it to know the number. I think it's number 6. What is that green circle identified there for?
That would be the location of Mr. Martin.
Based upon what?
Based on the marker from their total station data.
Okay. All of these data that you use, these data points, are from their total station, correct?
Correct.
And what you added to was some of the grading?
The slope, yes.
To gunshots?
Yes,
How many?
this one. Jimmy, get down.
And why is it stopped right here at this location?
That's the location of Selma Mora, and it's also from that viewpoint, the video uses a 50-millimeter lens, which is what a person perceives when they're looking at something. So this was to show her vantage point and what she would see.
Okay. And then the screen goes black until the entirety of the loud call is completed?
Yes.
No further need for the lights, Your Honor, though I have some other inquiry. There was a concern raised about the lighting conditions. In your other experience with creating animations, are there times when you have to accomplish a lighting change or a weather change or something to make the animation worthwhile?
Yes.
Tell the court about that.
Well, if it's something about whether, if you want to focus on whether somebody could, an eyewitness could really see what they saw, or the effects of weather on something, if that would be your main focus for a video, then you would create it that way. But the problem with that is, as you see in the courtroom here, there's ambient light, and it's really hard to get a totally accurate depiction of the lighting conditions. And
So
it'll vary according to what projector you use, and also even what printer you use if you're using posters. So in this video, the focus wasn't on reconstructing of the lighting, but it was more important to see what detail, the detail of what was going on in the video.
Was this animation then created with that, if you will, artificiality, so that it could actually be viewed by those people who have to view it?
Correct.
Obviously, it's much lighter in the animation than it would be that night, correct?
Correct.
Did you attempt to make it accurate in other ways, such as utilizing proper weather that was available to you for that night?
Yes, I added rain to it.
What was that based upon?
That was based on historic weather data that I got,
And
that I
did you
received.
add any wind to it to the extent it may have had any impact?
I didn't add wind to this. It was 7 miles an hour going northeast.
Was there anything that wind, in your experience, that wind would have added to or subtracted to in an animation of this nature?
Not in this case.
You were asked whether or not the software calibrates itself, or somehow, how would you know that it's working accurately? Can you give the court any further insight as to what happens when the software doesn't work accurately, or when it crashes or does something that it's not supposed to be doing?
You can verify something easily by just measuring an object, that you know the size of that object and just measuring it, like you do in real world.
And have you done that in your animations generally?
Yes.
And have you done it in this animation?
Yes.
How is that done?
Well, if you want to measure the size of an object, you can just grab that object and choose the dimension tool and it'll give you the height and the width of the object.
Is that also the way you recreated the, we'll call them avatars of Mr. Zimmerman and Mr. Martin by getting their height and their approximate body size, and then using, what tool did you use to then create those avatars?
The figures were already created, so I didn't waste time on the creation of them, but I adjusted certain things on them to match the size of the figures and the clothing that they were wearing.
For example, if I was to be in your motion capture suit at 6'2", would you have to take that avatar and make it smaller to 5'11" to be Mr. Martin?
Correct.
And is that what was done to give them the relative sizes that they have in these animations?
Correct. And even though you're using somebody that may not be the exact size when you're making the recording, when it imports the motion file into the software, you specify an exact size that it will come into the software.
So you were able to make Trayvon Martin's avatar 5'11"?
Yes.
Okay. And putting on his shoes, whatever size his shoes might be, to give him that additional height?
Shoes and the top of his hood.
Okay. And do you know what the height turned out to be based upon those additions to his height?
Approximately around 6'2".
In the still that you used concerning the moment of the shot, with that view that you had of it, would a gun in Mr. Zimmerman's right hand have been visible?
No.
Would the flash of the gun have been visible from that angle?
No.
Would you have had to have created another animation from ground level or from just behind Mr. Zimmerman's head in order to show the gun?
Correct. If that was the purpose of what I was trying to create, to put all that information into a video or a still image, there would be a lot more attention to that. But in this, that wasn't the purpose of this video at all. There's other people that can testify to the gunshot and the positioning of the gun and all that. This was just to show the position of who was on top and who was on the bottom.
And what was the purpose then? What was the purpose of doing it limited to that?
Well, I believe that's the main thing. With Dr. DeMaio's input, the person that was shot had to be the person that was on top, and the person doing the shooting was the person that was on the bottom. Correct.
Just a moment, Your Honor.
Thank you, Eddie. Recross.
Thank you.